So we got a question from one of the SAFE participants. It kind of has a few parts to it, so I'll answer it as best as I can. So they start out asking, how does the continually fluctuating image of a non-solid I interact with the idea of a mind stream which changes but also has continuities? And that we talk about the mind stream of this moment being dependent upon the last moment, and that moment's mind stream on the moment before, all the way back to this life's childhood and further back into other lives. Okay? So you have the continuity of the consciousness, one moment changing into another, and different levels of consciousness going from gross to subtle, back to gross and subtle, so everything constantly changing. And then the I is merely labeled independence upon the body and mind, but most particularly independence upon the mind because it's the continuity of this ever-changing mind that, spans from one lifetime to the next. Okay? But the mind is not a self, because it too, when you search for it to find something it is empty of true existence. And then this person said, how do the karmic imprints fit in? Okay, they certainly seem to have continuity over a lifetime and beyond. Could Western psychology's premise of maladaptive unconscious perceptions formed in childhood be like karmic imprints on a mind stream that has continuity? So, karmic imprints are imprints from our actions. Okay, what we've thought and developed as a fully formed thought or motivation, what we've said, what we've done with our body. So those are karmic imprints. There's other kinds of imprints as well. For example, there's the imprints of afflictions, and there's the seeds of afflictions. So we are very much creatures of habit, and ways of thinking about things or perspectives that we're very familiar with in one life, or emotional patterns we're familiar with in one life, can easily, because we've we've reinforced the seeds of those in our mind stream, then they can easily extend from one lifetime to the other, in some form. It doesn't mean that if you're angry in this, if you have such and such a personality in this life, then you're going to have the same personality in the next life. Because that doesn't hold, because you look at somebody like the continuity of the Dalai Lama and the personality of the 13th Dalai Lama as he's been described, and the personality of our present Dalai Lama, very different personalities, in terms of just how they are as a person. Apparently the 13th Dalai Lama was quite stern and, quite serious, and the 14th Dalai Lama can be too, but he's also, extremely, his compassion is the thing that you really notice about him. But he can also be quite like this when he wants to be. Okay, so, it's basically saying that what we cultivate in the past influences the present, what we cultivate in the present influences the future. How this relates to maladaptive unconscious perceptions. I'm not sure what maladaptive unconscious perceptions means, because to me perceptions means seeing something, seeing the raw sense data. Yeah. If it's maladaptive interpretations, then I can understand things a little bit better. For example, things happen to you when you're quite little. You don't understand how the adult world functions, so you interpret things according to a child's way of doing things, and then you just keep on with that interpretation for a long time. So if that happens, then as you have it, then you're reinforcing that kind of way of interpreting, way of looking at the world, So you find some people who look at the world and, they're always looking for being mistreated, or somebody else who's always thinking that the world is biased against them, or somebody else who looks at the world and thinks people are always really nice. And, people have different things, different perspectives. And so when you're little, those can be conditioned. But the thing is, that conditioning continues also when you're older, too. It isn't like, what happened when you were a kid is set in concrete. And as I always say, the nice thing about becoming an adult is that you can look back at the interpretations you had when you were a child, and you can look now as an adult and say, was that a correct or incorrect interpretation of things? For example, a lot of small children, when their parents get divorced, they're little, they don't understand what's going on. So they say, oh, I must have done something bad because mommy and daddy aren't together. Of course, a parent's divorce has nothing to do with the children being bad, but the children, having childlike minds, blame themselves about something that isn't their fault, that has nothing to do with them. So the nice thing about becoming an adult is if you look back and you see, oh, I've been accepting responsibility for other people's emotions. That isn't my responsibility at all, So I can stop doing this now because this is not, a correct perception. It's not a realistic way to relate to the world. So now I can stop interpreting things that way and looking at things from that perspective. Yeah, and so in that way you kind of recondition yourself, and you use your current wisdom, to show yourself that your childlike ways of seeing things were exactly that, childish ways of seeing things, and so you can begin to drop them. Then this person also asks, does Buddhism say, yes, these maladaptive, I'm going to change it from perceptions to interpretations, these maladaptive interpretations need to be seen for what they are, but it really doesn't matter what in your past formed them, because that situation and the person you were is not in this moment. Okay? So Buddhism does say, yes, these maladaptive interpretations need to be seen for what they are. Anything that is unrealistic, that does not correspond to reality, needs to be seen as unrealistic and not corresponding to reality. Because you can't be a Buddha who still believes in falsities, believes in things that are mistaken, okay? So yes, we do identify those things and see them as, emotional patterns that are based on afflictions that, that we don't need to continue to have, and we learn the antidotes to the afflictions and start to apply them. And I really like what Geshe-la said over the weekend about we don't just need the antidotes after we have the affliction. We need to make them so strong so that we have them before the affliction can even arise, because then they really work very well. Yeah, as soon as the affliction arises, you have to apply the antidote, but it's better if you have a strong antidote to start there so that it doesn't arise to start, the affliction doesn't come to start with. But it doesn't, from a Buddhist perspective, it doesn't really matter what happened in your childhood or your past that gave you this specific habit of looking at things in a certain way, or that started off an emotional habit in this life or a behavioral habit in this life. From a Buddhist point of view, what's more important is to identify the habits right now and see that they're unrealistic and see that they're not beneficial. You know, it's not so important going back into your childhood to see these things, because what happened when you were little is just one conditioning factor, but there's also things from previous lives. You know, and when are you ever going to get to the beginning of all these conditioning factors? Never. Okay? So it's a little bit surprising. You know, I remember when I first went to see my teachers, I thought, you know, I'm looking at my mind, I'm seeing my afflictions, and I thought, oh, you know, if you go to a therapist, they want to hear your story and tell your story again and again and look at it this way and that way. And my teachers weren't at all interested in my story. And I'm going, but this is my story, you know? And that's the problem, is I'm making my story into an identity. That's not me, you know? And my teachers are just saying, oh, that doesn't matter. Look at what's happening now. What's your anger doing now? What's your jealousy, your arrogance? What are these things doing now? How are they incorrect? Yeah? And so, of course, you know, sometimes we can see, you know, certain habits from childhood or whenever, and if that's helpful to, you know, pulling, you know, apart the different threads of an affliction, very good. That can be, you know, or if you can looking at your childhood helps you see certain patterns that you wouldn't have recognized otherwise, that's very good also. But from a Buddhist viewpoint, you know, going into the childhood and again, you know, discovering all these things is not really necessary. Yeah. So it depends on the person, you know, how you work with it. But the important thing is to see, you know, what am I thinking now, and is what I'm thinking now making sense? Yeah. And if it's not making sense, then, you know, I have to again and again come back and remind myself of what a more accurate perspective on a situation is. Okay.